Very warm welcome to our New Directions in Language Assessment webinar series. Today we're going to be speaking about speaking assessment constructs, and the title is Evolution or Revolution in the AI Era. Over to you, Sha.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to this webinar today and joining us for this exciting, which I see as really exciting topic. And at the beginning, let's do a different way of introducing the speakers. And instead of me introducing myself and my co-speaker, I will be welcoming my AI co-hosts to do the honors and introduce both of us. And just bear with me for 1 second. Let me just bring my AI co-host up. As you can see that I just brought up my phone and I will be now engaging my AI chatbot. Hi, can you hear me?
I hear you loud and clear. And I can see you as well. Looks like you're all set up in your workspace. Let me know what you need.
That's great. So before anything, could you please just be polite and say hi to our audience today?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to have all of you here today. I'm really looking forward to being a little co-host and helping out. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you so much, and sorry for cutting you off due to the time limit. And now I will be showing you the intro bio data of the two speakers. Could you please just help me introduce the two speakers, only including the name, the affiliation, and 1 sentence summary of each speaker, please?
I'd be glad to help. So first we have Dr. Sha Liu from the British Council, and she's a researcher focusing on AI in language assessment. And then we have Professor Parvaneh Tavakoli from the University of Reading, who specializes in second language acquisition. So those are our two speakers in a nutshell.
Thank you so much. Given the time limit, I wouldn't be talking to you anymore, but I will come back to you regarding your performance today later. So that's briefly how my AI co-host performed today in terms of helping me introducing the two speakers. I hope you enjoyed the different introduction. And you might be wondering, why are we introducing the speakers in a different way? The main reason is that's how nowadays we talk to AI tools in the real life scenarios, which brings into our attention this specific topic for today. That is, in the age of AI or Gen AI, what are we even talking about when we are addressing speaking construct or speaking constructs? Just to give you this brief overview, for example, just now you can tell that I was engaged in multiple modes of communication in terms of using linguistic, oral, visual, spatial, and gestural features. And at the same time, I was also fulfilling multiple language skill functions, such as the most important one, speaking, listening to the bot, maybe sometimes reading a bit of text on the screen, and then viewing as well. I was trying to engage with you guys at the same time. So that brings to the question, are we even looking at the same set of speaking construct or constructs in the AI era, in the AI age, as compared to the traditional field of speaking assessment? And instead of answering this question now, I will leave it as a question for us to think and consider throughout the whole session. And I promise I will come back to answer this question later on. So when we use AI as a speaking partner, how do we even define the speaking constructs? And I believe that some of you may have already practiced fluency pre-webinar exercise, but before that, let's just look at what these theories or what the research has been talking about regarding this specific topic. And now we are looking at the different language testing journals focusing on this specific topic. For example, we're looking at Language Assessment Quarterly, and then just a brief overview of another journal, Computer Assisted Language Learning. And then we are looking at Language Testing, the most important journal for the field of language assessment, I would say. And more importantly, we are looking at another one that is highly relevant, I believe, to most of you today. That's the teaching of English as a second language. So we are all exploring or investigating the impact of using artificial intelligence for the development and assessment of speaking ability. And what do we know so far? And before answering that, let's check what kind of understanding we have arrived at when practicing, when actually taking the pre-webinar exercises. For example, when we use AI as a speaking evaluator, how do we even evaluate speaking? And if I can just kindly remind you of the practice 1 from our pre-webinar guide, we might still remember that we were dealing with a monologic speaking assessment. We were just talking about the feedback, the topic, should AI be used in education? And I assume that most of you could be just like me, wondering, like, why are we doing this practice? And the key question was, which model would you trust to assess your students' speaking? And did the explicit guidance change your answer to that question while you were performing practice 1? And I will ask you later on, but before that, let me share with you my experience. So this is what I have discovered after trying out multiple AI models, for example, Grok, Kimi, Gemini, ChatGPT, and Perplexity, which were all listed in the practice guide. And as you can see here, interestingly, one of them refused to evaluate my speaking performance, simply saying, I can't evaluate speaking performance. As compared to Perplexity, which simply couldn't perform the speaking evaluation, we are also seeing other models, especially the leading models like ChatGPT and Gemini, they performed the speaking evaluation throughout the whole process. But we are also noticing the differences here, though. For example, we are saying scoring inconsistency, while some of them being really general, for example, giving my performance a band 7 to band 8 score, other ones were relatively harsher. And then at the same time, we were also saying the ASR issue, that is a recognition of my actual speech, like when Kimi saying, oh, you said this word, which I didn't at all. And that just brings back the question again, which model did you enjoy using the most? And for what reasons? Could you please just type down your answer in the chat? So while I continue with the slides, I can also engage with you and address your specific preferences of the AI models. And just now I have demonstrated the one specific phase of our speaking assessment roadmap, that is the use of monologic speaking assessment tasks to specifically target our speaking skill. And that is usually what we usually refer to as the discrete tasks. And you might be wondering, thank you for saying ChatGPT. I agree with you. I actually enjoy ChatGPT a lot as well. You might be wondering, for example, after using ChatGPT in the speaking process, are we making any change in terms of the way we assess speaking assessment at all? And that will, in the following slides, if we look at the practice 2 that you probably have also prepared for this webinar, we are looking at the dialogic speaking assessment, with the difference being this time, we're actually asking the AI model, be it ChatGPT or Gemini, to talk with us still on the same topic, that is, should AI be used in education? And this time, the question for all of us to think about is, in this specific practice, when the AI challenged our arguments, did we find ourselves adapting our language differently than we were doing that with a human speaker? What were missing and what new things were present in this new assessment scenario? And thank you so much for saying ChatGPT. I can tell now that most of you prefer ChatGPT. That's good to know. Thank you. And so in this specific practice where we have the interactive experience with the AI model, what happened again? Which speaking assessment constructs are we looking at? And again, just 1 second, if I may go back to the question here in terms of step 2. This time we were asking the model to focus on specific aspects of our performance. For example, we were asking the model to say how I started and ended the conversation. And another question could be how I maintained and developed the topic regarding whether AI should be used in education. So what were we doing there? And especially in relation to the construct. And if I can bring your attention to this, the foundational paper I used to design this practice, we might have a clearer understanding regarding why we did that. For example, if we look at the paper by Galati and Taylor in 2018, don't worry, I will provide a link to the paper, all the papers I mentioned today. And we were looking at multiple aspects of interactive competence when in the speaking assessment scenarios. For example, briefly, we were looking at turn taking. We were looking at how the topic development and management. And we may also be looking at like nonverbal modalities like gaze patterns, if we were talking to the real human being, or the AI model with a video function, etc., etc. So that's how we were usually looking at interactive competence in the traditional speaking assessment scenario. But the question is, what has been changed in the AI-mediated speaking assessment? If we move closely to the present time, if we look at the systematic review conducted by Zhai and Weibo, and we were looking at still the core interactive competence, the core feature, IC features being the same, but at the same time, we might also be checking, for example, how do we now, as a human being, align ourselves, our interaction with the AI speaking partner, rather than the human speaking partner. And at the same time, how were we doing the back channeling behaviors, like by accommodating the AI features, depending on, of course, which model we were using. And if we even move the time to closer to today, this is all the 3 papers which have all been experimenting using AI-aided speaking assessment tools to help evaluate the speaker's performance. And we can see that, again, fully aligned with us, they prefer ChatGPT platform. I guess now we know the reason behind that. And then we were looking at different aspects of IC features again. Different tools, different platforms, different features. If we focus on the most recent study just released a few days ago, they were looking at refusals. How do we turn down the request? And how do we make a request, for example, clarification request? And how do we employ pragmatic strategies when performing the AI-mediated speaking task? And now the question is, why are we looking at them? What does it have to do with our speaking construct or constructs in the AI era? That's because whenever AI is introduced, we may probably be looking at a different or evolving sets of constructs. And then that brings us to the more close to today kind of assessment roadmap. That's the integrated tasks. This time by integrated, I was more focused on the compilation of at least 2 skills, that is listening and speaking, as shown in our practice guide. But of course, in reality, this integrated lecture can be even more complex than this. For example, it can be combining the different input materials. And then if we quickly move on to practice 3, this time, if you remember, I asked you, could you please just engage the video functions of AI tools? And the question for us to think about when performing this task again, if you want to do it again after this webinar, that is, did we find ourselves performing for the camera when talking to the AI tools rather than communicating through it? Did we try to accommodate the AI partner in order to improve our speaking performance? And if again, I can bring your attention to the evaluation prompt this time. Let's just focus on one or two questions from here. For example, I was asking the model to focus on how did I split my attention between delivering my message and monitoring my visual responses at the same time. And what's the logic behind such an assessment design? Again, this was designed based on recent research, with one of them being the most important paper just published by this journal, Annual Review of Applied Linguistics, a few weeks ago. This time we're looking at a new construct that is called communicative competence in the age of AI. And we are looking at 3 pillars of this construct. For example, the context, obviously being AI mediated, and the capability to use AI technology to enhance communication that was already embedded in our practice questions, and also the traits related to the traditional understanding of communicative competence. That's one of the most recent set of understanding of this construct. And if we look closer, we combine that paper with our understanding based on our practice using different AI platforms. We might be also looking at some unique features. I may not have time to go through all of them, but if we focus on the unique features specific to our practice guide, we might be looking at, for example, is a unidirectional visual presentation. That's mainly from us presenting on the topic whether AI should be used in education, or did we pay attention to our gesture amplification for the camera rather than for example, for the room or for the human speaker? And then did we also try to accommodate the platform navigation during speech? If we use ChatGPT, it might be different from Gemini if you had the experience of doing that task. So to summarize, we are now looking at, rather than the traditional enhanced version of communicational competence, we might be looking at a new construct that's called multimodal digital oral communication by accommodating all the unique features I just mentioned. And what does that imply for our speaking assessment design? And that brings us to the most up-to-date stage of designing multimodal speaking assessment tasks for our assessment purposes, be it classroom-based or large-scale language tests. And if I can bring your attention back to the introduction, our AI co-host introduction today, if I can remind you again of the modes of communication and the skills, the multiple skills that has been combined in this specific communication scenario, we are now looking at new sets of skills. For example, viewing, watching, observing, etc., etc. And for a fact, the skill of viewing has already been added into the national curriculum of different countries such as China and Korea and Singapore. Of course, welcome to check that after this webinar. And now we are giving it a specific name called digital multimodal oral communication, specially unique in the AI-mediated speaking assessment tasks. And what we mean by that, in addition to combine multiple task inputs such as image, video, oral, and textual, etc., we were also trying to prompt the speaker to use or engage with multiple digital or traditional skills. And the most important purpose being, we would want to assess the learner's multimodal literacy by check whether they can engage or orchestrate those different modes and skills in order to complement a specific communicative goal. In our practice guide that was talking about the topic, co-host a session about the topic of whether AI should be used in education. And thank you so much for the applause. And that brings us to the core question for today. Are we looking at evolving constructs, or are we looking at revolutionary constructs? And the question mark is left here on purpose for us all to consider during the remaining sessions, including mine and Parvaneh's session on fluency assessment. But here, if we just briefly review what we have in the traditional speaking assessment, we usually look at fluency, vocabulary, grammar, cohesion, pronunciation, and interaction that was included. And today we also introduce a new concept that is multimodal digital communication. And where do we place them on this continuum of construct change? Now we'll decide how we design the speaking assessment tasks. And if I may, I will just briefly address 2 of them. For example, interactional competence might be all on the transformational side, with major changes from the traditional perspective to the AI-mediated perspective. And then, of course, we have the brand new construct that is digital multimodal or multimodal digital oral communication. And how about fluency? And excuse me, but I would want to keep this as a question for you until you arrive at the session by Parvaneh, because I'm pretty sure Parvaneh will give you the most insightful presentation on this topic. And for now, I will just keep it for a question for us to think for now. And then that brings me to like the ending sections of my part. That is, how do we, as a human expert or the teachers, can we help ensure the speaking assessment constructs in whichever speaking assessment context we are looking at? And I believe that all of us may have heard about the concept of human in the loop. That is, we keep human throughout the whole process. But how do we do that? What does it even mean in the real life scenarios? If we look at the previous research findings, and we are looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different factors that may contribute to the change, the different degrees of change of the speaking construct. For example, it could be the AI platforms, as we have already experienced in our practice guide. It can be the task design as well as a purpose. It can be the research tradition. It can be the mode of interaction. For example, whether it's voice enabled or it's video enabled. And then how much do we have the control over the AI platforms? And then how about the assessment integration goals, etc. But when the research findings are put into practice, are we looking at the same set of factors, or are we always going to expect variance from those factors? And now this is obviously just a initial understanding, sharing my initial understanding based on my real life experience of designing such a platform, that is an AI mediated speaking assessment platform, which will soon be released. And it's called AIBC, which is really cute as a name, I believe. And this is how the task looks, but due to the time limit and also time the inconvenience of sharing this platform at this moment, and I will just be sharing the interface with you guys for today, but please stay tuned. And what did I discover in the process of designing such a platform together with, of course, with my colleagues? We identified 8 different stages, or in other words, 8 different points, key points, where we might be introducing those construct changing factors. And we wouldn't have time to go through each one of them, but I believe we have already had first-hand experience with some of them. For example, task specifications, as shown in the practice guide. And we are also looking at how to implement them into our own technological platforms, etc. And this is the 2 questions for us to always keep in mind when designing such speaking assessment tasks, with the second one being the most fundamental. That is, which decision layer may trigger the gradual evaluation, for example, interactive competence, and which might actually even may even introduce the paradigm shifting brand new speaking assessment construct, like the multimodal digital oral communication construct we talked about. And this is a summary of the previous research, which have already pointed into the possible directions where we might be cautious about, especially when we want to ensure the speaking assessment constructs. And again, for today's purpose, let's just focus on one of them. When we use AI scoring tools to evaluate the speaking performance, we might really need to rebalance the proficiency dimensions. For example, grammar, vocabulary, cohesion, etc. And we might also need to consider potentially redefine the core speaking construct in our own AI-mediated speaking context. Which tool do we use? And what does that mean in terms of our definition of the speaking assessment constructs? And this is why we have recently released this paper that is human expert-centered, learner-first AI use approach. That is, we will always lead the human judgment to be making the core decisions, and we always need to keep in mind what could be the most beneficial design and decisions for our targeted language learners. It can be our students, it can be the other test takers, etc., etc. But all in all, the summary being responsible use of AI, responsible ethical use of AI to ensure fair assessment. And then in order to do that, we need to be well equipped with AI tools and our understanding of the AI tools, but I wouldn't have time to go through each of them. I promise they will be shared with you, including the link to the different resources. For example, as shown on this page, you will have the direct link to the different platforms to help us better understand and make use of these tools. But I'm aware of the time, and if I may, I would like to discuss some future directions really briefly and the challenges we might be facing. The first direction that we might need to consider is when we introduce facial recognition AI tools, when they can actually see whether we are happy, nervous, or demotivated, how do we ensure the speaking constructs? And when we introduce the tools which can jump into the speaking terms without waiting for us human beings to finish our own sentence, how do we accommodate that? I'm pretty sure Parvaneh has a lot to share with you guys later. And then we are looking at the bias patterns of the different tools, like you have seen, ChatGPT, Gemini, etc. How do we address the patterns in order to make it fair for our users? And last but not the least, how do we ensure the good balance between the good goal of ensuring the most authentic, fair multimodal speaking assessment while considering the costs of using such tools? And I will just be ending my session here, and I will give back the floor to Cheryl to introduce our next speaker, Parvaneh, and I really look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lots of food for thought in that presentation. Before I hand over to Parvaneh, just to say very briefly a reminder to post your questions in the Q&A, and also if there are any questions in the Q&A that you particularly would like to have answered that other people have posted, please use the arrow to upvote the questions. Parvaneh, really looking forward to your presentation, and over to you now.
Thank you, Cheryl. First of all, I would like to thank Sha for this very exciting and multimodal digital presentation. Sha has raised several thought-provoking questions that I would refer to during my presentation. Compared to what Sha was doing, she was focusing on speaking construct as a whole. I'm trying to narrow the focus down to assessment of oral fluency, and especially in the generative AI era. I would focus on affordances, complexities, and challenges that assessment of oral fluency is associated with. But before doing that, I would like to focus on the construct of fluency. What is second language oral fluency, how it has been traditionally assessed, and what is now happening with the assessment of fluency in this Gen I era. So in terms of why to focus on fluency, I would like to say that this is a sub-construct of speaking ability that has been assessed for at least about a century on record. We have several English language and other languages tests that assess fluency as a core construct of second language speaking ability, because it is closely related to communicative success. We know that those learners, speakers who are communicatively successful, they are good with their fluency. Recently, my colleague Cheryl and I have also discussed the relationship between fluency and comprehensibility in a book that is available open access online if you are interested. Comprehensibility in language assessment. Here we have shown that a central part of comprehensibility is linked to fluency. And here by comprehensibility, we are discussing the perceived ease of understanding a speaker, the listener's ease of understanding a speaker or a sample of a speech. Therefore, those who are fluent speakers tend to be comprehensible, easily understood. And finally, there is a very high correlation between fluency and proficiency. And based on that correlation, we can predict the degree of proficiency, the level of proficiency of a learner by looking at their fluency. But before moving on, I would like to ask this kind of critical question of what is fluency? What is a second language speaker's fluency? Here I've got 4 statements. I would like you to read these statements and put in the chat A, B, C, or D that best defines oral fluency in the technical sense of the term for language assessment. Which statement? A, B, C, or D? Yes, and I am going to agree with those who said C, as it defines fluency, the ability to speak smoothly, effortlessly, without undue hesitation or interruption. A obviously is referring to the general speaking ability or proficiency. B is referring to comprehensibility and pronunciation, and D is referring to constructs such as accuracy, complexity, and range of language used. Okay, so if we want to agree on a definition, the overall definition given and agreed quite widely about fluency is general ease, flow, continuity of speech, highlighted by specific temporal and acoustic features and disfluency markers. Therefore, a fluent second language speaker speaks at reasonable and natural speed. The speech is smooth, interruption-free. There is a natural pausing patterns, by which we mean speakers tend to pause more frequently at the end of a clause or at the end of the utterance compared to mid positions. And then finally, lack of undue disfluency markers. This means all speakers would have some hesitation, some repetitions, but these are not frequent and these are not undue. So if we want to measure fluency objectively, we have got at least 4 categories to look at, 4 dimensions: speed, silence, composite measures that combine speed and pausing, and repair. I'll come back to these later on. Completing Sha's task, webinar task, she asked us to record ourselves and to ask our own AI device to assess our speaking ability and fluency included. So this is what I did. This was Sha's practice 1, step 2. I asked ChatGPT to look at my proficiency, and this is what it's given me. So it assessed my fluency at 7 or 7.5. Here, I want you to look at how I have been assessed. I speak at a natural pace with very few hesitations. Ideas follow clear, logical order, reframing questions. Suggestion, some sentences are quite long. Okay, here are 2 points. First of all, you can see that because it is following IELTS rating descriptors, it is assessing my fluency combined with coherence. And that's why the first bullet point is about my speed and hesitations, and the second speed about my coherence. Second point, if you remember, Sha was asking whether we would listen to the AI to change our behavior. I can tell you that I'm not going to listen to it. Academics, as well as politicians, are known for using very long sentences. So I don't see the need to make my sentences shorter. Okay, what do we know about fluency? We know that fluency is a complex construct, multidimensional, and that's why it is difficult to define and operationalize. It was difficult without AI being involved, and now we can expect more layers of complexity that we're moving to AI assessment of fluency. We know that fluency develops when proficiency increases. So higher proficiency level speakers are more fluent. But it's not all about proficiency, as we will see in the next slide. We know that certain aspects of fluency develop faster than others. It's easier for people to develop their speed. Pausing seems to be quite resistant to change. And finally, we know that instruction helps. Language teachers have been successful in promoting fluency when they use fluency-focused practice. What factors affect fluency? Don't forget that we said proficiency is part of it, but it's not all about proficiency. Here I'm referring to at least 4 factors that affect fluency. Cross-linguistic and cross-cultural variables. Certain languages are faster than others. Japanese and Spanish, they have a much higher articulation rate. We know that speakers of different L1s use and demonstrate different fluency behaviors. Some languages are more repetitive. Some languages use more pauses. And we know that even within the same language, there are cultural differences. For example, American speakers of English have different uses of field pauses compared to British speakers. We also know that personal styles are important. Some of us, in our first language, we speak faster than others. We might have a lot more repetitive language. We might show more repetitions and hesitations than others in our first language. And then we carry those behavior with us to second language. So in second language, we tend to follow, at least to some extent, our behavior in first language. Research in this area has shown that L1 and L2 fluency behaviors are related, and we can predict L2 fluency behavior to some extent from the speaker's first language behavior. In other words, when we are assessing someone's second language fluency, we're not only assessing their second language fluency, we are at least to some extent looking at the rate of speech in their first language, the pausing patterns, the hesitations, repetitions, etc. Finally, task design has shown massive impact on fluency. We know, for example, communicative functions matter. When we give bad news, we tend to slow down. We might have a lot more pauses. We might use a more repetitive language. Also, we speak differently in a monologue compared to a dialogue. And these are things that I would get back to later on. Okay, now, again, your task 2, which of the following statements are correct? A, B, C, or D? Please read the statements and put them in the chat. Which ones do you think are correct? Yes, true. All 4 statements are correct because we know L2 learners pause more frequently than L1 speakers at mid-clause positions. This doesn't mean L1 speakers don't pause in the middle of a clause. They may, but L2 learners do it more, especially those at lower levels of proficiency. L2 speakers' fluency behavior can be predicted from their L1. Speakers speak faster when complaining, and L2 speakers speak faster when in a collaborative dialogic task. How has fluency been assessed? We have already talked about this, both Sha and I. We know that traditionally, fluency has been assessed by two assessors or examiners working with rating scales and rating descriptors and assessing the speaker's fluency according to the band levels they're working with. This is IELTS, in which fluency is combined with coherence. We've got Trinity, we've got TOEFL IBT, and we've got PTE. There are many differences, for example, the number of levels or bands they have looked at. Two key differences I want to refer to is that in different tests, fluency might be assessed independently, for example, in PTE, or combined with other aspects of speaking, for example, IELTS or Trinity. Second difference is that some language testing organizations had for nearly a decade drawn on automatic assessment of fluency. So fluency, for example, in Pearson Test of English has been assessed automatically for a long time now. If we look at IELTS, we can see these are descriptors that define fluency at band 9 and band 7. You can see many references to repetitions, self-corrections, hesitations, also some indication of speed, able to keep going on and readily producing long turns. If you look at other tests, a common theme you would see is that they rely almost heavily on repair measures, hesitations, corrections, etc. This is something that I would like to come back to later on. So if we look at these measures that I mentioned, they can be measured objectively. Which of these do you think lend themselves more readily to automatic assessment of speaking? Speed, silence, composite, or repair? Based on the way they are calculated, we can see that speed, silence, and composite measures lend themselves readily to automated assessment. You identify the amount of time spoken, the number of syllables produced, the pauses made, and then you can come up with some objective measures. Okay, now I want to move to some recent research done in this area to showcase to what extent fluency is related to proficiency and to what extent we can rely on automated assessment of fluency. Here I'm referring to two studies that I worked with other colleagues to investigate the relationship between objective measures of fluency on one hand and assessed levels of proficiency in another. In other words, we collected data from candidates who had been assessed for their proficiency. Then we used the transcription of the data and assessed their fluency behavior objectively, and we tried to see to what extent the two match. In the first study, we used APTIS test, the British Council APTIS test. In the second study, we used Test of English for educational purposes. Both tests are standardized and validated. And in both tests, two human assessors rated proficiency of the speakers. Here we have the results for both studies. They were very similar. Here we had results that suggested speed and composite fluency had a linear relationship with proficiency. Also for silence, we could see quite linear relationship between frequency of pauses and proficiency. In other words, if we had the opportunity to measure objective aspects of fluency, they correlated very highly with proficiency levels. When we got to repairs, hesitations, self-corrections, we couldn't identify any linear relationship or any consistent patterns. This is quite worrying because, as I mentioned before, a lot of language tests, international standardized language tests, rely quite heavily on repair measures in their assessment of fluency. So here, the good news is that some of these linear relationships suggest that they can be automatically assessed, but not about repair measures. Another point to take away here from this discussion is that these findings were from monologic data collected from these tests. So we don't know what happens with dialogic interactive tasks. Would proficiency and fluency relate in a linear manner together? So assessing fluency in a dialogue proved to be very different in a study in 2016 and 2018 when I compared fluency in monologic and dialogic performance. There were significant differences in the same speakers speaking in a monologue compared to the dialogue. Articulation rate was much higher in a dialogue, speech rate the same, pauses were longer in a monologue, and length of run and phonation times ratios were different. We could also see differences in repairs and field pauses, but they were not statistically meaningful. Here, I'm only talking about those aspects of fluency that can be measured objectively. We know that fluency and altogether speaking is not all about these objectively measured aspects. From the work that Sha was referring to, Galazzi and Taylor, they have talked about interactional competence, ability to interact with others in a speaking task, to construct meaningful interaction, depends on turn management, topic management, etc., etc. When we assess fluency in a dialogic task, how easy is it to look at turn management via automatic assessment, non-verbal behavior, managing communication breakdown, personal traits, for example, dominance of one of the speakers. These are aspects of communication that human beings could look after quite easily. To what extent can we leave these to AI to assess? Okay, now I'm going to move to the final part of my talk that looks into assessment of fluency in the Gen AI era. We know that technology has assisted us to move very fast towards assessment of speaking ability. And we know that availability of AI to us is very, very resourceful. It provides us with benefits and affordances. But it's not all about those benefits and affordances. We know that, for example, my colleagues Habazbashi et al. Mentioned that automated assessment of a speaking ability is shrouded in mystery and technical jargons. It looks like a black box, it resembles a black box, very opaque box that you put a sample of a speech into it, and in a matter of a minute, it gives you a score and some assessment of which levels they belong to, without really giving us any transparency about what AI has done or any accountability. You saw in Sha's presentation that her speech has been put on different levels of proficiency, quite a wide spectrum of proficiency levels by these different machines, without any of them providing any transparency or accountability about what they have done to arrive at that assessment. And here, Habasbashi et al. Argued that our responsibility is to ask the right questions to improve transparency and accountability. And the rest of my talk focuses on those questions. We have talked about affordances of interacting with AI for nearly 3 years now. I'm referring to this study in which they have done a systematic review of all studies reporting results from practicing speaking with chatbots. And they suggest that chatbots provide us opportunities for improving pronunciation and intonation. Increased practice offers fluency development. They give us real-time feedback and personalized experience, and they reduce anxiety. Excellent. We can benefit from this, and our learners can benefit from this. But how about the concerns that come with such affordances? Here, we are looking at the concerns specifically related to fluency. Several researchers have identified issues with automated assessment of fluency, especially in dialogic tasks. One issue reported is the issue of diarization. Here we mean diarization refers to segmenting text based on who's who. The first step in most AI-related assessment is that speech is transformed to text, and identifying who said which part becomes really difficult when there is background noise, when there are short turns, overlapping speech, back channels, and fillers. And these are characteristics of human speech. Some other researchers suggest that measures that show high levels of predictability for fluency, assessment of fluency in monologues, fail to function in dialogue. So to what extent can we rely on AI when we assess fluency in interaction? And we know that we want to have an insight into interactive abilities of our students ourselves. We also have concerns about assessment of fluency in relation to these interactional features of speech. Turn management. When we speak to human beings, we are fully aware of our role in assessment. Even if we don't speak the second language, we have the word knowledge and we know how to interrupt one another. But do we know how to interrupt or how we should interrupt a machine? Does the machine know how we interrupt each other? My observation is that because we understand AI at the moment doesn't have a lot of emotional intelligence, we feel free to interrupt them as frequently as possible or whenever we want. Responsiveness is very different when we work with a chatbot. In terms of human relationships, humans negotiate repair with one another, but assessment of this negotiation is difficult. And also matters of scaffolding is difficult. We know that turn level measurement, which is a standard used by many in monologic tasks, is not fit for purpose for dialogic tasks. When there is a pause between two speakers, whose pause is that? And how is AI going to work with that pause to decide who is the more fluent speaker? My key questions: would AI be able to control for core individual speaker factors? If you remember, I said 4 levels of factors affect fluency are L1, are personal traits. Are we going to be able to control for those? Can we train machines with sufficient samples of speakers, different L1 backgrounds, different L2 backgrounds, different personal traits? Can we train our machine that speaker who is dominant has got these qualities? And finally, can we control for task-related factors? Because if we don't, then we're running into these risks, construct irrelevant variants, biased data sets, and construct coverage. My last slide, final remarks to take away. Yes, we've got lots of beautiful affordances here, increase in efficiency, reduce subjectivity, being able to handle large scale assessment, high levels of agreement with human ratings. But do these mean we will have valid, reliable, fair assessment of speaking ability and in particular fluency in my interest? Can neural network-based assessment measure the same construct as human assessors? Yes, we're going to remove human bias. Many of us have been concerned about this, but are we introducing new types of bias? And we know that AI scoring systems tend to work with surface level features. Probably they would rely on acoustic features. But how about in-depth fluency features? Are we shifting the language paradigms, the language norms? This is a good question to discuss further. And are we going to generate new washback effects? Are we going to teach our learners that when you speak to a machine, don't worry about how frequently you interrupt them. Don't worry about how interrupt other speakers if you are assessed by Gen AI. Thank you very much. This is the end of my presentation, and I've got all the references available. I give it back to my colleagues for question and answer session.
Thank you so much, Parvaneh and Sha. What a wonderful set of presentations, and definitely a lot to think about. It feels like we're at a point in education and of course more widely in society about really deciding how we are going to interact with AI, how we can get leverage all the best things about AI, but still be accountable and responsible about how we use it. Thank you very much for putting some questions in the Q&A box. I'm going to paraphrase one of the first ones that came up, and that is around the CEFR companion volume and introducing the whole idea of mediation. And as Daniel, thank you very much for your question, Daniel, as Daniel has pointed out, already it's been difficult to integrate that into assessment. So now, as Sha discussed in her presentation, we're looking at a much wider skill set, all the multimodal and the DMOC skills that you spoke about. How can we bring that into assessment? Is it feasible? How do we meet this challenge? And perhaps, Sha, as you introduce that concept, if you would like to start with an answer.
Yeah, thank you for all the really interesting and intriguing questions, because I was actually checking all of them. Especially, I have some experience to share with bringing mediation from CEFR framework back into our actual assessment practice. And at this moment, I can't speak for all, but based on my experience, I would say one starting point for us to consider might be how do we evaluate this, the way the speaker integrate the input materials, whatever it is, back into the speaking performance. For example, if it's text plus image, text plus video, text plus audio, and how many materials did they actually engage, and to what extent did such use actually serve the communicative purpose for this specific speaking task? And that could be the two possible early starts for us to bringing in this construct into the whole picture of speaking assessment in the AI age. But I'm pretty sure, Parvaneh, you may have something to share as well, and Cheryl, you yourself.
I'd like to hear from you.
Well, I think we are definitely walking into an unknown territory. Yeah, mediation seemed to be, of course, as a practice, mediation was something that examiners and assessors always considered. But as a formal introduction to our assessment practices, the concept of mediation was rather new, and it highlighted a kind of paradigm shift from moving away from a purely cognitive information processing perspective to a more sociocultural perspective in language assessment. And now we are adding a deep layer of complexity about the extent to which mediation can play a role in AI-assisted automated assessment of speaking. I don't have much to add to this, but to say just watch this space.
So giving us an opportunity perhaps to measure things that we weren't necessarily able to measure before. Thank you. One of the other questions in the Q&A box also relates, I think, to a question that we had that we weren't able to answer from the last session. And it's from an anonymous participant. And the question is the focus of this webinar to equip AI to assess a learner's English, or are we trying to assess how good a learner is at talking to AI? And the question that came up last week that's related is, I don't understand why we should reconsider assessment due to the AI era. Shouldn't we adopt AI? Well, shouldn't AI adopt to us? And I think this touches on the idea of, is it the tail wagging the dog or the dog wagging the tail? Are we trying to change the construct of speaking to match what AI can do and what technology can do? Or are we truly starting with the construct? And I wonder if you have something to say about that. Perhaps, Parvaneh, we can start with you.
I'm old enough to know the time when we thought, if AI finds its way in our assessment, we have definitely passed that stage. Perhaps for a decade we've been talking about this, and for the past 3 years we have been heavily involved in it. To me, this relationship is a mutual relationship. We have a role to play here, but AI also has a role to play here. I'm sure everyone in this room has experience of nowadays, without you even wanting, Google offers you AI assistant. Whether you take it or not is your choice, but this is the first search in your Google search. So I don't think it's a matter of which comes first. We know that we both exist here, and we have to work together to make sure that what we have invested in, by that I mean language assessment, continues to be done systematically, ethically. That's the final aim, and we have to be open.
Thanks, Parvaneh. Sha, do you have a comment on that?
Yes, I do. And I think Parvaneh has already beautifully summarized the key picture here. And I totally agree. We should be mutually wagging each other. That's how, like dog wagging tail, tail wagging the dog. And I would want to say, from the ecological perspective, as we have demonstrated at the beginning, we are already using AI to form our way, or shaping our way of speaking communication. And pretty sure the use of AI for assessment purpose will be having the whooshback effect on shaping how it's actually going to happen in real life as well. So we're looking at a cycle where we may have many, many stops for us to think about this. But all in all, from where I stand, I would say we would want to keep human in the loop, not just in the loop. It should be the driving force, the human expert and teachers. And then also always put the learner's benefits at the core. That should be the benchmark for us to make the decision. And that's my understanding. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I've had people talking about moving away from talking about human in the loop to talking about human-led, and I think that's an important point. I think we have time for one more question at least before we bring this to a close, and perhaps linked a little bit to that is the question around, have you taken into consideration cultural and ethical aspects of introducing AI tools into assessment? And it seems this question links specifically to those differences. So, and maybe it's connected to this idea that AI perhaps tries to standardize things, to forget about the outliers and those variations, even though they may be perfectly acceptable. So I wonder what you have to say about that question. Sha, shall we start with you?
Yeah, as you can tell, when I was like reviewing the questions, I already prepared for some links, useful links for this topic, because I'm aware of one of the most prominent researchers, that's David Wei-Dai from UCL, who has already published serious papers regarding interactive competence, especially when located in a cultural context. So I believe reading his papers will be really helpful and will share with you even more insightful insights regarding this topic. So I was just aware of the time, I will just stop here.
I would say currently, as I indicated in my talk, there are several questions and concerns that researchers have. I myself have a lot of concerns about, the biased data sets, etc., etc. But generally speaking, I'm a very optimistic person, and I feel that in long term, if the amount of development and progress we've seen over the past few years in the use of AI, if that trend develops, I believe the amount of bias and the amount of cultural differences that we can see would become less and less. And there would be an opportunity for us to respect cultural differences and to demonstrate them through making different data sets available for assessment purposes.
Thank you. I might add as well is that we really need to take this opportunity to make sure that those data sets are representative. So everyone who's on this webinar, make sure that you're finding ways to get your learners represented and cultural aspects, variability represented in those training sets as well. Okay. Very, very briefly, one for you, Parvaneh, to end the webinar. Technically speaking, is it true that there can be fluency in an A2 speaker? And would that be very different from a C2 speaker's fluency characteristics?
Thank you for this question. Yes, obviously, every single speaker has got fluency to some extent. And the fact that we rank them from 0 to 9, for example, and perhaps with a test like IELTS, no one gets 0 to 4. Or with a test like TEEP, no one gets 0 to 5, and everyone goes between 5 and 9, suggests that someone has got fluency. Would it be different from C2? Yes. If you are an assessor, an experienced assessor, you listen to a sample of a speech and you can soon arrive at a conclusion that, roughly speaking, this person belongs to which level. The same applies to automatic assessment. The automatic assessment would give us quite reliable assessment of fluency in monologic tasks for certain aspects of fluency.
Thank you very much. Sha, one brief sentence to leave our audience with?
Well, when it comes to A2, just from the practical perspective, for example, do we include fluency as one of the evaluation criteria, or do we not? And why is that? That's my my comment. Yeah, thank you.
Super. Thank you so much. Well, thank you very much, Parvaneh and Sha, for really engaging discussion today. Please do take the survey, and Anna will be putting the survey link into the chat. And we really look forward to welcoming you to other webinars, other New Direction webinars. We have one a month going forward, some really interesting topics coming up, and looking forward to engaging with you as an audience in the future. Thank you very much, Parvaneh and Sha.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.